you finding
Yeah,
this
this
shit?
is I forget his last name. One of the Bloomberg ETF guys, James. He's been on top of this. He's a great follow in terms of just staying on top of this stuff. But basically, this is over the last year. This is the spot price of Bitcoin, and then this is like the rolling futures. If they had this sort of product, which wasn't on the market, but this is the last year-over-year performance. And basically, what you see is that the futures ETF underperformed the just spot Bitcoin by 35% because of there's this contango, right? When futures are trading above spot price, you have to roll these futures contracts over. And so if you're constantly buying above spot price and then selling that contract the next month and buying above spot price, because for the mostly Bitcoin futures trade in contango, they trade above spot. You're just kind of bleeding money against Bitcoin. So like you buy the futures ETF and like Bitcoin rips and you're gonna do all right. Like you're gonna do very well actually, but you're gonna underperform Bitcoin over a sustained period of time, which is why I, at the start said I would never buy this, because essentially you're just kind of transferring some of your money to the people that are going to come arb you. They're going to arbitrage the spread down, and you're just going to kind of bleed out money compared to just spot.
Got it. And so when you start to think about the this futures issue, is this mostly institutions that are going to come in and buy it, or are these actually individual like retail investors that are going to go try to buy this thing?
Yeah, I think in general it's just good for the legitimacy of Bitcoin and in the eyes of people that have been skeptics for a decade, right? Like you're gonna have a lot of capital that's just sitting in bond tranches and these macro funds, and they've ignored Bitcoin and they've laughed and they called it speculative, and now all of a sudden there's an ETF that's approved by the SEC. They're saying Bitcoin's here to stay. You have Jerome Powell last week. We're not going to ban it, even though they have no jurisdiction to ban it. All these things, it's just like, checking off like the FUD boxes, like, oh, China ban, like check off the box. Bitcoin ETF, even if it's futures, check off the box. And so, now there's a huge way to just kind of like an easy way for people to allocate capital. Like Grayscale is a trust, MicroStrategy is a stock that, that's levered. There's equity risk there. Well, a futures ETF, like, if I want to, buy this during some sort of macro risk off, or if I want to buy it as an inflation hedge, maybe I'm not going to hold this for a year, but there's literally trillions of dollars of capital that now has, very easy access to Bitcoin, its performance. So in that sense, I think it's very bullish. And I think it's leading a spot ETF that will probably come in 2022.
Yeah. And so what is your thought process about this bull market that we're going into right now in terms of what is your price prediction for the end of the year, or how high do you think that we can go in the bull market?
Yeah, tough question. I love it. I'm wearing the 100K hat. I think that comes fast, honestly. Once the all-time high breaks, like people kind of gawk at big numbers, but again, like you have to look at Bitcoin in the log chart for a reason. And when we break these all-time highs, I think it's going to be similar to kind of the price action we saw after 20K broke. We flirted with 19, 20K for a little bit, and then a month after the all-time high broke, we were at 40,000. So I think, maybe that doesn't repeat exactly, but it's going to trade, and it's going to trade very, very reflexively. It's going to go parabolic, and a lot of people, are going to kind of, it's going to melt faces. And so you're going to have a lot of capital, flooding into this asset, and you're going to have not a lot of people selling, especially early on. So, I think we're at, six figures or close to it by the end of the year. And I'm pretty confident that it's not just, going to stop there. Bitcoin is here to stay.
I completely agree. Do you think that the bull market runs through the end of the year, or do you think it'll actually extend into like Q1, Q2 of next year?
Yeah, I think what a lot of people are, when you're comparing it to 2017, just like the cycle by cycle thing or by halvings, what people don't really understand is we kind of had a full bear market condensed into like 3 months. So we had massive derivative liquidations. Everybody that was leveraged, even like, people are saying, oh, Bitcoin never goes down 50% in a bull market. I'll just 2x long. Everyone was wiped out. You had a massive miner capitulation kind of engineered politically by China. You had a huge like puke up of spot coins that you can literally see on chain that were all reaccumulated. So we kind of had like, this traditional like 3-year bear market that we always have, like, or that Bitcoin's had, a few times. We just saw that in like a pretty condensed amount of time. So I think, in that sense, it's super bullish in that we kind of just like charged back up to run it back. So that's why I'm like, hey, like, we might not top here in 90 days, and it might, this cycle might not be so much of a traditional 4-year cycle, and it might, continue to just run on as Bitcoin is, now it's here to stay. Like all these FUD like boxes that I was saying were checked off. well, everybody in the world is looking at this thing. You have presidents tweeting about buying the dip. Like, we're in somewhat of a new paradigm here. And I hate saying this time is different, but in the sense of Bitcoin's not going to go down 80% and die for 3 years, I'm very confident in that. So I think the tradition of a 4-year cycle, like Will said earlier, I think that might go away.
Got it. And so one of the things that, if we come back to this Bitcoin futures ETF, I think I saw Raul Paul, who was tweeting. He was basically saying this idea of issuing a Bitcoin futures ETF. It's a good step, but basically handing hedge funds a massive arbitrage opportunity, as the futures will trade at a large premium in bull phases, and then the hedge funds will get to capture those returns. And so he's saying that it's an old financial market trick. You now have to add multiple new intermediaries who all make profits: the ETF provider, the clearinghouse, futures broker, administrator, auditor, law firm, CME, and hedge fund ARBs. Wall Street gets richer, retail investors lose again. Like, is that your general read on how this futures ETF will kind of come into the market and play?
Yeah, I mean, more or less, I think a little less, maybe not harsh, but just, I think in general, like a Bitcoin futures ETF is better than sitting on zero or sitting on nothing, sitting on no exposure. Like, you should hold your own keys. You should buy spot Bitcoin, and you should self custody. You should do all the, best practices for being a Bitcoin holder. But, if you're sitting in some, if you're like a legacy asset manager and you couldn't have any exposure before, well, this isn't a bad first step. So it is true that, you're gonna underperform spot Bitcoin just because of, the 1% annual fee, or I think it's like 90 basis points. And this, kind of contango that you're going to bleed up against because you have to roll this thing over, like we kind of covered. It is true that people are going to come arb this, but that's good because, that ultimately attracts more capital. And I think, maybe not in terms of the CME, but when you're talking about physically settled futures contracts, which means, Bitcoin has to be delivered at a certain date. If I sell a futures contract, I'm promising to deliver that Bitcoin. I think over time, the most bullish thing is we now have a fair cost of capital in the market. So, interest rates everywhere are manipulated. Global central banks are going crazy. Rates are negative. They're letting inflation run hot and keeping yields basically pinned at zero. So everybody that's basically like the cost of capital is negative, which doesn't make any sense. But now with Bitcoin, you have this global, neutral, apolitical, sovereign asset, hard capped. Nobody can manipulate it, and now you have this free market for the future. You have like basically a cost of capital that's free and open. And so CME, yes, it's paper traded. You can't put up Bitcoin as collateral. These things are kinks that I think will be fixed over time, and I think we will get a physically settled futures market in the U.S. But ultimately, that's the beauty of Bitcoin is now we have a free and open market for money that no one can manipulate. And so if CME, if there's some sort of manipulation like the gold bugs say, you'll see that in the difference between, say, Deribit or FTX or something with a real Bitcoin futures market with Bitcoin delivery versus cash CME. So that's the most bullish aspect. The maturation of this asset class is something that's happening gradually then suddenly. And so these things, even if it's not perfect, are broadly very bullish.